Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm Liz Heiman, and each week I'm joined by your crew of seasoned sales experts who have navigated these waters and come out victorious. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic.
Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. In a series of episodes, we're really talking about selling in uncertain or difficult times. Sometimes they're volatile, whatever the word is that you want to use. Sales can become more difficult or more challenging in these times. So we're talking about things like mindset. We've been talking about what you can do strategically and tactically to help improve your sales outcomes. And now I really want to talk about, let's think about, and again, I want to try to not be political as we're talking about this, but I want to talk about what's happening right now that might impact your customers. So, if we talk about tariffs, which are happening right now, what could that mean for some of our clients and how do we help them through that? Or there's regulation and deregulation. What other things are happening right now that might be impacting our clients that we should be thinking about, and how do we help them in this environment? So that's where I want to go. It may get political. We'll try not to get too political because I know everybody has different opinions about what's good or bad. We have Darryl, our Canadian, who has a different perspective.
Or not. It might be the same.
I suspect it might be the same, but I'll be able to give you the perspective. Think of me as a client, right? If you were trying to sell me and there are tariffs on my company, there are economic considerations and impacts, absolutely. But there's other considerations too, and we can get into that.
So get into that. Let's get into it. So I know that one of the places I do a lot of work is Iowa. Interestingly enough, I live in Nevada. I grew up in New Jersey. I've always been coastal, and suddenly I'm in Iowa, and not living there, but just working there. And it's very interesting because three of the biggest companies in Iowa count on steel. Pella Windows, Vermeer, and John Deere are three huge economic drivers in that community, in that state. There are others, but those are three that I keep running into with my clients. And so because there are tariffs being talked about or in place, possibly staying, possibly not, but companies like John Deere are, they're thinking about how they can save money, right? So because they want to make sure that if they are impacted by tariffs and they don't want to have to raise their prices too much. And I have not heard this from John Deere specifically, but this, as my economist background, this is what I start thinking. So, that's one thing, is when our clients are facing tariffs, they may be thinking about how do we cut other costs to lower the impact of tariffs. What other things might our customers be dealing with? Go ahead, Brynne.
So I don't have a lot on this topic, but the one thing that I'm going to say, and by the way, many of my clients are bankers, so that's full disclosure. I think companies need to partner with bankers that have solutions for funding alternatives, for leasing opportunities, for financing, for get really close with some bankers that can help your clients get what they need, maybe at the same monthly cost, so that although the bigger picture, the expense may be higher in the long run, we can work with them so that they're not feeling the pain in the monthly cost. So I am not, most of what I do is not tariffed, right? Like, and most of my clients are service-based. But the one thing that I would highly recommend is this is the opportunity to build relationships with people that can help your customers buy your stuff easier.
And so this is that creativity piece, right? How do we get creative in the environment that we're in to help our clients buy from us in maybe a different way than they normally would? Mike has been, if you are with us without video, you cannot see that Mike has been writing on his whiteboard. So Mike, show us what we got.
What's that? I'm just putting up kind of cool words that some people have said, like Darryl with the verb, the noun, and then Brynne with the de-risk and know your alternatives, and then also Renee relative to the data piece. I'm fortunate enough to work with a couple of companies who are deep in this mess, either because some of the things that go into the products that they create are globally sourced, or some of them are manufactured overseas and then brought into the States. And when there's a high level of uncertainty, like we've been talking about, clarity of communication is critical. If you get yourself into a situation where someone feels like you're not communicating clearly or not sharing updates in real time, they will start to put together their story on their own, and they'll start reacting to different things that they might see inside the media, or they might hear on some of the posting that's out on LinkedIn, or they might do wherever they're getting the data. So as a leader in your business, as a leader relative to the work that you do with your customers, be really clear. And if you have questions about it, ask the people inside your organization. So much is changing right now from a time frame perspective, and guesses around what the next move is and what the next move is after the next move. And I've seen percentages range anywhere from 3 to 25%, which is different than some of the other ones. And on smaller parts, it's specifically coming from certain areas, you get into the 145% type things. But there's some really interesting things that are happening in the market. And what Brynne highlighted is super important. You may not have the cash to invest now to de-risk yourself and deploy that capital to hold on to things and secure pricing for a period of time. Even if you do have the cash, your provider may not have the resources to be able to provide that in the same amount of time to keep pricing consistent. If you don't have the cash and your provider has the resources, there are ways to get capital to come in and bring it together. And to Brynne's point, the ways to go through and talk with people about how to address, spread out your risk over a period of time. And you might be more comfortable taking a couple of points risk on borrowing money than taking significant point risk on uncertainty. Those are all judgment calls. And here's the sad part about it. It's sad and positive. You have to make a freaking decision. Have criteria to go make a decision. If you sit there and don't make a decision, in the great words of both William Shakespeare and Rush, you still have made a choice. So anyway, those are just some things to think about. And I'm fortunate enough to work in an environment where this has created a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion. And in some instances, I think some people are taking advantage of the situation, which is unfortunate.
I mentioned in our first episode that we did today earlier that I do have a client who's very, very much a part of the supply chain. And the thing that I think is very interesting that a lot of people maybe haven't thought through for how this is going to impact their clients is we are still in a bit of a wait and see period where a lot of people, there's a 90-day pause. What happened during that time, though, was people withheld a lot of orders. And we are now at the end or past the inventory run of what they had from when they withheld, right? So we already have, this goes to what do we know right now, right? We already have fewer things, at least in the US, coming into the country, fewer ships, fewer things that got ordered, which will create a backlog on the back half of the year. So if you think about seasonality for your customers, if you think about if fourth quarter is incredibly important and we're going to have a backlog, what are things that you can do now? If you think about the global connectiveness of a lot of these things, my client pointed out they think their actual product is okay, but the packaging is very much at risk, right? So we're back to some of those same things that we encountered during COVID, where we really have to think through logistically and think through our seasonality, our customer seasonality and logistics, and find
whatever ways that we can help and make sure that we're communicating whatever we can communicate. So if my client has these direct relationships with the manufacturers who understand more about what's going on with their own individual supply chain, they can aggregate that and make sure that we're creating cadence so that people understand and know. There are a lot of people who don't know that this has happened right now because it's just kind of starting to trickle in with this lower amount of freight hitting the ports. It's happening. I live in a major port city, so it's a big topic here. But it's Los Angeles is the port that's probably hitting the most, Seattle and Los Angeles. So I think there are things that we already know that we can certainly start planning for our customers and really thinking through how it impacts them. That seasonality piece, I think, is going to be key, because if we are dependent on numbers in a certain part of the year that hasn't happened, and it hits our customers, right? We already know this part is coming for the next 3 months because it'll take at least 3 months to sort of get back. For instance, I'll just mention one thing. The toy industry and the juvenile industry have basically said, there's no way we can move faster. So if you knew that you were dependent on something with toys, they've already stated there will be shortages. Or juvenile, I mean sippy cups and plastic bowls and the things that you get for kids that you don't want to destroy your entire house, that you go through that little toddler period for. All of those things, they're going to be very hard to come by. So, if you had a customer that deals with young children as part of their target market, then this will impact them.
I'll jump in. So a couple things. Just for clarity, for those who don't know, because it can be a little confusing, the challenge of the tariff is basically it's a tax that the importer pays. So in the example that Renee just gave about packaging, maybe everything was made domestically in, the US of A, but the packaging came from overseas. Well, you as an American company who are trying to sell this end product to your customer, you incur a cost for that packaging, but now that's gone up dramatically, and maybe China right now is 145%. So you need to have a conversation in your own organization so you understand how to answer this to your prospects. In other words, the customer your prospect is likely going to ask you to absorb that hit, the additional 140%, 5% component charge in that packaging. Are you going to hold your price at what's listed, your MSRP? Are you going to jack it up? I don't want you to jack it up. I don't want to absorb that tariff. But you want to pass it off as a company because you don't want to incur it yourself. It impacts your profit. So what's your company line? What's your boilerplate? Do you have an answer? That's the first part. So same applies to inventory shortages, which is what Renee was getting at. The ports are getting a little thin. So if I want that Barbie doll, as a wonderful example, but it's not on the shelves because everybody's gone through their current inventory and they're trying to wait out the tariffs, therefore there's nothing coming in the short term, but your customer wants it now, how are you going to answer that without annoying your customer, without picking up? Those are things to think about. You need to have some company verbiage on that one. Now, where I'll add something interesting that a lot of people don't think about is when you're selling to international clients. Okay, so I'm Canadian. The US currently is tariffed Canada, like other countries. There's something you need to understand that you need to have an answer for. I'm not saying what the answer is, but you need to be aware of this to your international clients, is that those international clients are not necessarily going to be big fans of the USA. They like you. It's not a you thing. You're great. It's the country. So how are you going to handle that objection? And they're going to give it to you. They're going to say, I don't want to buy from you right now. I'm angry at your country. What's your verbiage for handling that? What's your solution if that international client says, I'm going to buy it from another vendor in a different country? How do you respond to that? Because that's how they're getting around the tariffs. All right. Next, this is a big one that no one thinks about. What are the public figures, typically the executives in your company, saying about the tariffs or about the political leadership of the USA? If they're on record as saying something that an international client who's being tariffed doesn't agree with, what are you going to do? Personally, I would immediately, as the head of marketing, go to all my executives and public figures and say, don't say anything. Avoid the topic. Don't go public. Avoid it like there's no tomorrow. So those are some considerations that you need to think about. What's your response on holding the price or inventory shortages? And how do you manage the indirect brand hit you're going to get because you happen to be based in the US and that's the country doing the tariffing? How did I do, Liz? Was that okay?
Very well done. Very
Thank
well done. I think it's really interesting because, and those of you who hear me talk more often than not will know I'm always talking about the C's of selling, right? So in the last hour and a half, we've gone through being curious, what's going on with your clients? What are they saying? What are they thinking? What are they doing, right? We've gone through compassion or what Brynne called empathy, right? Trying to understand, be sitting in their shoes, trying to, right? We've talked about communication. Don't fall behind on your communication. Stay ahead of it. Keep your customers informed. Be very clear. Clarity is one of my other C's. Be very clear about what you're doing. Be thoughtful about what you're saying. Great. All of these things become important, and creativity now more than ever is hugely important. It's time to stop and look at your messaging and figure out how are you going to be creative about how you're talking to your customers. I don't mean creative telling stories or lying. I mean creative in how are we going to focus on solving in ways that maybe we haven't had to in the past, and how are we going to talk about it? This is good stuff. Anybody else have something we want to add? Brynne, you were going to jump off. Do you have anything before you jump?
All I can say is I love being the dumbest person in this room, and I learned so much. I am blown away every single time. I just love you guys. Just the brilliance. And I wish you all a fabulous Mother's Day. If you're listening to this in replay, I hope you had a wonderful Mother's Day. And thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Super. One strategy you can think about, just as an aside, we used to do this all the time for tax reasons or for currency reasons, but it applies here too. If you're selling something to an international client, if you're selling something to a domestic client and you're American, but they have an international office, you can actually, if it's possible, you can sell your item not on American paper, but on the paper of the country of your other office. And that will avoid all the tariffs. So just a way to get around it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. All right. Any other last thoughts on this topic? And I really just wanted to talk about this to get us thinking. Like, what are our customers going through? What are we going through? How are we going to talk about it? Regardless, again, of your political opinion about good or bad, here's the reality we're in. How do we leverage our strengths to overcome whatever difficulties we might come across?
Liz,
I think that, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to build on what you talked about. With some notice, like we already kind of know some of the things that are going to happen in the back half of the year. With some notice, we need to start thinking about things like our sales and marketing materials that we know are going to need to change. We may not be ready to update them now, but we can certainly triage and make a list of what needs to get updated and what priorities, so that we aren't caught as short as we have from things like 9/11 or COVID or things like that, where they were instantaneous things. Now we have a little bit of a heads up. So kind of go back to that playbook. What did you have to update? You probably don't have the same people in place that you had back then, based on the stats of how many people moved around. Go back, get together, figure out what you did, what might need to get in shape, whatever change comes. It's a good exercise to do every so often anyway. And it's a high likelihood that we will have some change. So at least get things in order and know what you need to update when you know what to update.
Go for it, Chris.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is you really need to understand, I think, two things. One is how your customer is impacted, if they're impacted, right? But the other is probably a little bit more of a soft skill, listening to them, understanding how they feel about the tariffs, even if their industry is not impacted, because they might have a perspective on it and you need to be aware of that, right? So I think it's just being a little bit more subtle in the way that you have to approach those types of things. Because just because their industry isn't impacted doesn't mean that, hey, maybe their spouse or their child's industry or somebody else. So they have it coming from other areas that aren't directly related to them in their job.
Building on what Chris just said, that's a great prompt there, sir. If you as a sales professional or a marketing professional are big advocates of the tariffs and what's going on, I would resist the urge to share that or to say, isn't this great? Even if you believe it is. So to Chris's point, exactly, because you don't know what they're going through and how they have been impacted themselves. So excellent point.
And so we've been talking, hang on one second, Mike. We've been talking about tariffs and we've been talking about regulation. We haven't talked about layoffs and we haven't talked about budget cuts. And those things for some of my clients are huge because they have government contracts. Or like here in Nevada, where the university and, the Desert Research Center and places like that are so important to our economy and the people who have jobs. These things matter. So being aware of those at the same time as we're talking, how is our client going to be impacted? Do they have government contracts or do they sell to people who have government contracts? And what will that mean for them? Or again, this listening, was your spouse laid off? Was your friend laid off? Were your kids laid off from government jobs? So just kind of keeping these things, there's a lot going on and it's hard to juggle all of it. So just really being listening, asking, curious, listening, try not to do so much telling if you can help it, and do a lot more listening, and acknowledging, right? My ask, if I can see why that would be upsetting. You don't have to agree. You just have to acknowledge, right? And I know, Mike, you've got something to say, so.
I'm going to repeat some of what you just said. You get more information, you learn more through the questions you ask than the information you get. And if you sit there and you ask questions and listen and then ask the next follow-up question, you'll get a sense for things from the perspective of others. And what you might actually find, is that there's already a conversation going on inside that organization that you're working with around how they're handling it with either their own stuff or with other vendors that they're working with or partners that they're working with. And now we share information, we learn together and keep things moving forward.
I had one more thought. It's just an angle we hadn't thought about yet and talked about. Your customers, if they're American, may be very pro-America, God bless them, and they may be very pro-tariffs. What does that mean to you? Use the example again that Renee used. If I'm Renee and I say, well, my item's going to cost a little bit more because we have to offset the cost because our packaging came from overseas. Your very pro-America, pro-tariff prospect may say, well, what are you doing to put that packaging in the US of A to support our country? That's a very possible objection that you'll get. So again, goes back to, being thoughtful, having a soundtrack, anticipating the objections you're going to get, and being aligned within your organization. And it's not going to be easy because it will probably go off the rails and you're going to end up having political conversations. Keep it focused.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks, you guys. I really want to thank the crew. This was a tough conversation, and I hope that it's been helpful to all of you who are listening to really think about this. And this isn't just today. This isn't just what's happening now. These things happen over and over. We talked about that in the beginning. So this is a talk about what's happening now, but it's also a talk about every time the world changes, how are we changing with it? And as salespeople and business owners, we've got to be flexible. We've got to be able to pivot and we've got to be able to communicate. So thanks, you guys, for having this conversation. We're going to, in our next episode, we're going to have some fun. So join us on our next episode. And we're going to we're going to dig into the fun side of all of this. So we'll see you in our next episode.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Sales SOS Podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope that episode has equipped you to navigate sales leadership with confidence. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to your Sales SOS Podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on LinkedIn or YouTube. Until next time, keep sailing toward your sales goal.